Hello everyone and welcome to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and our Aviation Outlook webinar. I'm Alan Stolzer, Dean of the College of Aviation at the Daytona Beach campus. For our 10th webinar in the series, we are teaming up with our friends in the Office of Alumni Engagement and the Eagle Alumni Association for a very special 2020 virtual homecoming week edition of Aviation Outlook, featuring 4 outstanding members of the FAA's Women in Aviation Advisory Board who just happen to be Embry-Riddle alumni. Our guests tonight have ties to and are subject matter experts in a wide variety of disciplines within the aviation industry, including commercial airlines leadership development, flight training, safety management, accident investigations, urban air mobility, academia, and advocacy, which includes working to increase diversity across the spectrum of the industry and specifically the recruitment and retention of women in all aspects of aviation. Dana Donati is the General Manager and Director of Academic Programs at LIFT, the Leadership in Flight Training Academy powered by Republic Airways. Now in its 3rd year, LIFT and Republic are addressing the commercial airline pilot and maintenance tech shortage as the only regional airline to operate its own training academy, creating a fast-track path to becoming a pilot or maintenance tech at Republic. Dana has also held leadership roles in both the airlines and aviation higher education. She is a member of the Women in Aviation International and Advancing Women in Transportation. Kate Frazier is Joby Aviation's head of safety, overseeing the safety of over 500 employees at 4 facilities. Joby is developing one of the world's most advanced electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, designed specifically to pioneer the air taxi market. Prior to Joby, she served as Uber's head of aviation policy, working with policymakers to make urban air mobility a reality. She also spent 3 years with the FAA in the Office of Accident Investigation and Prevention. She is a board member of the National Business Aviation Association and former Director of Safety and Outreach at the General Aviation Manufacturers Association. Crystal Barrois is a Delta Airlines Boeing 75767 first officer. She is also the manager of pilot development, overseeing the Delta Propel Pilot Career Path program, of which Embry-Riddle is a partner. She also oversees the community career path programs and the Ascend Pilot Leadership Program, which works to improve policies for female pilots and increase diversity in the pilot hiring and leadership pipelines. She has also worked as a domestic and international captain and first officer for regional, foreign, and cargo air carriers. Dr. Becky Ludy is an associate professor at the University of Nebraska at Omaha Aviation Institute. She conducts research on a variety of topics with a primary focus on aviation workforce development and the outreach and the recruitment and retention of women in aviation. She is an active member of the 99s, Women in Aviation International, Experimental Aircraft Association, and serves on the board of the University Aviation Association. She is a certified flight instructor and was a part-time faculty member at Embry-Riddle for 5 years. Before we begin, I'd like to let everyone know that the views expressed by our panelists this afternoon are their own and do not represent the official position of the DOT's Women in Aviation Advisory Board. I could go on about the many accomplishments of our guests, but let's meet them instead. Crystal, Dana, Kate, and Becky, welcome to Aviation Outlook.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's start by having each of you tell us about the degree you received from Embry-Riddle and when that occurred. Crystal, let's start with you.
I am a 2004 graduate. I was in the Aeronautical Science program, and I have a Bachelor of Science in Aeronautical Science.
Excellent. And Dana?
And I'm a 2019 graduate. I received my MBA in Aviation and Leadership.
And Kate?
I'm a 2018 graduate of the Worldwide Campus, and I received my Master's of Science in Human Factors in Aerospace.
Excellent. And Becky?
I am a 1991 graduate from the extended campus for Embry-Riddle with Bachelor of Science in Professional Aeronautics.
Excellent. Well, again, welcome all. We certainly want to focus on diversity in all its forms for this webinar, but I also want to be cognizant that we're going through a pandemic that affects nearly all segments of our industry. I'd like to give each of you some time to address anything pandemic related. Crystal, can you update us on the airline side and how Delta is faring through this?
Sure. You know, just like everyone else, we are figuring it out day to day. It seems like the unions and the managements are just in discussions all the time, trying to figure out how to save pilot jobs, how to save jobs across the company, where we can fly, what equipment we should put on those routes. So it's a very uncertain time right now in the airlines. It's very disorienting and disruptive, and there's a lot of change happening and infrastructure change happening. So you know, it can be a little bit discouraging, I think, if you read the news every day and you're watching CNBC or whatever. But I also think that there's a lot of landscape for opportunity right now with change and disruption and, you know, sort of the tumultuous world that we live in. There is space for opportunity in that, and especially when it comes to diversity topics. We have the time to focus on some different things right now, and I'm looking forward to seeing what kinds of opportunities that we can take advantage of, so potentially we can come out on the other side of this even stronger than we were.
Excellent. Terrific. Dana, you run a well-regarded pathway training program for Republic Airways, which is planning some significant job reductions in the future. Talk to us about that and how that is affecting the Lift Academy.
Absolutely. So I would agree with everything that Crystal's saying. You know, it's a very unfortunate time, and Republic Airways is working with all of their employees to, you know, figure out different mitigation strategies to eliminate furloughs or job losses. You know, with Lift Academy, we're still training, we're still recruiting, and you know, as frustrating, like Crystal said, that, you know, the industry is seeing some lows. You know, this is a good time to build up that education, build up that training, so when the airlines do see that recovery, people are ready to, you know, sit right seat at Republic.
Absolutely. Kate, you've been in the urban air mobility world for a while now. How has COVID-19 affected your segment of the industry?
Yeah, well, you know, it's been interesting. And then really speaking more specifically to Joby, it's been incredible watching this team adapt and evolve to the changes of COVID-19. We've been able to power through, we've been able to keep working, and really focused on how we can be compassionate with our employees, make sure that they have what they need during such a turbulent time, support them in every way that we can so that they can do their jobs as effectively as possible, and of course as safely as possible. And leading safety for Joby has now meant also leading COVID safety. So it's been a learning experience for me as well, but you know, really just impressed with our team and how we've been able to pivot and show a lot of flexibility so that we can kind of stick to our timelines and just keep progressing.
Leading Joby through COVID-19 probably was not in your educational program at Embry-Riddle, unfortunately, but
not so much, but that's okay.
I know you're doing a great job. Becky, like me, you're in higher ed. How is University of Nebraska Aviation doing, and what do you see ahead for our segment?
Well, I'd like to say we're the bright spot out of this conversation. So we know what the industry is doing now, but we actually are up in enrollments at the Institute at University of Nebraska. So we're seeing increased enrollments again this fall, as we have for the last several years. The University Aviation Association, which tracks numbers of enrollments, has seen increases in enrollments for the last several years. So the pipeline is good and the pipeline is strong. And I think that's important. You know, IATA's talking about a turnaround of the industry in about 2024. So we'd like to think that our graduates, you know, are spending their time, our students are spending their time wisely, being prepared to be that next generation and being prepared and getting trained and ready to enter the workforce when that turnaround hits. So, so we're up. So that's good news for us.
That is great news. In reading your backgrounds, I learned that each of you has had a very interesting journey that led you to where you are today. I'd like to talk about what that initial spark was that drew you to aviation. Kate, I believe your grandfather was a pilot in World War II, and you also are an experienced pilot. Talk about that background and also what eventually led you to urban air mobility.
Yeah, so my grandfather was a B-17 pilot in World War II and grew up with a healthy love and appreciation for all things aviation. But I really wanted to be an astronaut, to be honest. That was my dream. Sometimes I say I settled for being a pilot, but you know, it was actually working at space camp, going to space camp, that got me interested in becoming a pilot and really transferring into school so that I could major in that. I unfortunately, like many people, graduated during the Great Recession. So I got creative with what I wanted to do next. To be perfectly honest, I did not have the patience to be a flight instructor for a few more years while we waited. So I started looking at literally any job with the word aviation in it. I wanted to work in aviation, but I wasn't sure what that meant, and ultimately got really lucky by going to Gamma and spending about 9 years in DC between the trade association and working for the FAA. But it was ultimately the innovative nature of urban air mobility that drew me into Uber and now Joby. It's so exciting to see the developments in the industry that have really allowed us now to look at electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft and to really make them a reality. So I was very excited about a lot of things that have been happening and was just thrilled that I could be a part of it.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating segment of the industry, and it's fun to watch it develop. Becky, you also have a military connection as you grew up near Air Force bases. But why aviation in particular? What made you believe you would be successful in the field? Was it a person, event, or something else?
I think it was probably the Air Force brat experience for sure. My dad was retired Air Force, was a navigator on B-52s, had all kinds of different experiences. So I grew up in and around Air Force bases. And so when I mentioned to my dad that I was interested in flying, he was very supportive, and I was able to have that opportunity through the Aero Club at the Offutt Air Force Base, which then turned into the extended campus program that I did at Offutt Air Force Base with Embry-Riddle. So that, I have an uncle who was also an airline pilot, and then corporate pilot. So it was just kind of in the blood and in the family, and there was never a doubt of whether I could. It was always just a desire to go out there and fly. So my background is really in flight training, and I started flying at Offutt Air Force Base, as I mentioned, and landing a Tomahawk on a runway that's designed for B-52 is really quite an experience. So it was a really cool way to learn to fly in a great environment. I went back there as a flight instructor eventually as well. And then just through a variety of circumstances, ended up in aviation higher education. I mean, I was ready to go airline. That was my entire career goal. I actually flew the line for a while for a commuter up in Nebraska, and then wandered onto the campus at UNO, my hometown, because they had started this aviation program. Walked in the door just to ask a question about what it was, and met this incredible director at the time named Bill Shea, who 3 hours later had convinced me to teach a class. And I just walked in to get like a brochure. So, and I end up, loving it. And I told him at the time, I said, I will teach one class for you, but I'm going to go to the airlines. That's my plan. I'll do this one time. And absolutely found a whole new area of aviation I didn't expect. Loved it. And I've been in aviation higher education ever since. That's been 25 plus years now. So So that was a little bit of my journey, but certainly sparked by my dad, my uncle, and being in and around Air Force bases.
Excellent. Once you wander onto a university campus, it can be hard to leave.
It can. You're exactly right.
Crystal, I read that you indicated that a WASP inspired you toward aviation. Tell our audience about that.
That's true. My dad was a private pilot. He got his private pilot's license in the Marine Corps in Japan. And we had a small airplane when I was growing up in my younger years. And I would go flying with him, but I don't think he knew that women flew either. He never encouraged me really to learn how to, that this is something I could do. And I was at an air show with him when I was actually at another university. I'm from Atlanta. I was going to the University of Georgia at the time. And we went to Sun and Fun down in Florida, and I met a WASP, a Woman Air Force Service pilot. And she was amazing. She was so cool. And she told, and I was in shock that she flew, and she said, honey, you can do it too, if that's something you want to do. And that was really the light bulb that I needed to go off in my head. And I kind of looked at my dad and said, I can do it too. And he said, well, why don't you do it? So looked into Embry-Riddle and I was a sophomore at the time and wanted to be able to graduate with a job as a pilot. And so thought getting my degree and flying at the same time would be the way to do that. So transferred down to Embry-Riddle, and that was a similar time. I was flying right after 9/11. I was working on my private during 9/11. So very similar to what we're experiencing now, although I think now might be a little bit different. It's different in many ways, but sort of the same. So just continued my flight training and ended up, because of Embry-Riddle, I got an internship with a regional airline, and then was hired there several months after I finished my internship while I was flight instructing. So I think that was one of the benefits definitely to going to Embry-Riddle, was having that exposure to other airlines and being able to get that internship and then ultimately a job shortly after. But I flew for the regionals. I was a captain at a regional airline. After the 2008 crisis, I went overseas and I flew in Vietnam for 2.5 years as a captain and a line check pilot, training pilots from different parts of the world. That was really interesting. And then I flew for a cargo company. I flew the mighty Boeing 747 for a cargo carrier all over the world, and then got hired at Delta in 2014. And since I've been at Delta, I was recruited to come in and help develop a leadership program, because I recognized that we didn't really have very many leaders in flight ops that were women. And through all of that, developed a leadership program to identify future leaders in our organization and develop them, and hopefully have some diversity in that leadership pipeline. And also worked like you said, on the Delta Propel team, focusing on our community outreach and our company career path programs. Did quite a few different projects with Delta Flight Ops, but it's really been quite a ride in the airlines for the last nearing 20 years. So, add coronavirus to that, and it's been quite a career, but a really good one so far.
You've had an amazing journey.
It has been a journey.
And Dana, you also had some military inspiration. I read something somewhere about a KC-135 and a trip to Hawaii.
Yeah, so I grew up as an Army brat and had the opportunity to take military hops all across the world. So I was 15 years old, and we boarded a KC-135, and I was sitting in a net with my oxygen mask. And one of the crew members asked if I wanted to go sit in the cockpit, because I was looking up there and you can see what was going on. So I sat in the jump seat, and I sat up there for the entire flight. I'm sure they thought I was going to be up there for just a few minutes, and just sat there and talked to the navigator. He showed me everything that was going on. There was a female up there too, so she answered questions. And as soon as we landed, I asked them, where did you go to college, like, how do I get into aviation? Because I didn't come from a family of aviators. And the colleges that they told me, I went to those after I graduated high school and planned on going the military route. Decided to get into flight instructing and go to the airlines because I really didn't have that guidance of like what the path looked like. So I really kind of, listened to my peers and followed the path that they were going on, and just very fortunate to be on the course I am, and just really chose, what I'm passionate about and how I can help others in this career.
That's terrific. All of you share a bond as graduates of Embry-Riddle. You are also serving on the newly formed U.S. Department of Transportation's Women in Aviation Advisory Board. What do you hope to accomplish as members of that committee? And since that's kind of the heart of our discussion today, I want to give each of you an opportunity to respond. Crystal, you've had some experiences with diversity at Delta. What would you like to take from that experience to the new advisory board?
Really, we're trying to figure out what are the major barriers that exist, and how can we sort of break down those barriers? How can we give young women exposure early on and sort of inspire them that this is something that this is definitely a career path that they could see themselves in? And then how do we create those pathways for them? How do we give them those opportunities? So at Delta, we were looking into all kinds of things like that. How do we train our pilots? What do our policies look like where maybe we are preventing women from, preventing retention for women? Even with our uniforms, what can we do with our uniforms so that we're more inclusive there? And then with outreach, where do we need to look? How deep do we need to go in order to inspire young women, and what types of young women are interested in this career? And that's really kind of what the conversation we're having in the board. And it's really exciting to be able to produce recommendations, look at those barriers from women across the board, all across the country, in all different facets of aviation, and look at what those barriers are and figure out how we can break those down, and then produce recommendations of actions that we can actually accomplish so that young women can see intentional marketing that's directed towards them, so that maybe funding can be allocated appropriately so that people who may not have never had access now have access to funding so that they can learn how to fly if that's something that they want to do. How can we promote the career so that, and how can we look internally to create a career path that is stable and that does allow people to have families and has flexibility and those types of things. So it's really exciting to be a part of the board and be able to produce those recommendations. And I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of actions come out of those.
Dana, I know I would imagine that a lot of the ideas that come out of this will be gained through dialogue and discussion among the board members. What's your experience thus far? I know the board has just been formed. I think you've met once or twice. Is that true? What's the path forward, do you think, for the board?
Yeah, so we have met a couple times as a large group. But Dr. Heather Wilson has been leading us well and has divided us into subcommittees so we can work together a little closely and try to dig into the information that Crystal was mentioning. So I'm a part of the training and recruiting subcommittee, and there's certain things that we're looking into when it comes to recruiting. How young do we have to go? But what we're doing is identifying those gaps in K through 12 system or beyond secondary education. Where are those gaps, and how can we get the right organizations working, with the organizations that are supporting these students? So for instance, K through 12 does have a development career standards that they have to implement through guidance counselors. We're identifying some of the gaps in there, and how can we ensure that the transportation industry and that aviation is being emphasized in those standards.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Kate, you've worked in aviation for several years now. When the work of this committee is done, what do you hope it will have accomplished?
That's a good question. I think first and foremost is that we have to look at where we are today. You know, we've been at 7% of the pilot population is women for a very long time. That number has been stagnant for a very long time. And it is much worse on the maintenance side. It is much worse for people of color and minority groups. And so I think the biggest thing, like the very end goal of all of this, is that we move that needle. Now, I think Crystal hit the nail on the head when she's talking about tangible things that we can actually implement. It's one thing to sit in a room and have these conversations, but the goal ultimately of this board is to produce tangible, actionable solutions. And so I think every committee has different priorities. The committee that I sit on is success stories. So how do we advertise women in aviation? How do we show young women and girls what it means to be in the aviation industry? And that means highlighting a few things, highlighting not just pilots, of course, engineers and software engineers and finance and scheduling, and truly showing what it means to work in the aviation industry, not just in specific roles. And I think for me personally, what it also means for showing that success is showing that not just the incredible people. Of course, you always want to highlight these really exceptional people, trailblazers that have accomplished so much, but you also want to show what it looks like to be a regular pilot, a regular person with children and a life, and someone who's still able to be an airline pilot. And this is how they balance their life, and this is how it's done, because I think it's so important that we highlight representable people and relatable people to young girls and women. So that's a little bit of the work that we're doing on the success stories. We're still kind of figuring out what the implementation methods look like. And really kind of targeting who we want to show and what type of people we want to show, but really excited about the work of it. And I hope that at the end of all of this, we actually move the needle.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. We tend to gravitate toward highlighting the superstars, and sometimes they're not as relatable as some of the others. So other stories we need to tell. So that's a really interesting point. Becky, I know you have considerable experience conducting research on this topic. What are your thoughts at this point?
Yeah, I think, with the board work, what we're really talking about, as Kate mentioned, is moving that needle. And so I guess my frustration, as you will, as a woman in the industry and as somebody that does research, is that these numbers really have been quite stagnant. They really haven't moved much. So we're talking about 5% of airline pilots being women, 2.4% maintenance technicians being women. Airline captains, an even smaller percentage, only 1% of airline pilots are female captains today. Mm-hmm. So again, those numbers just aren't moving. So my passion with the board and my work is really to see what does the data show about why women are drawn to aviation, why they want to stay or leave, and what those gender gaps truly are. And I think that now that we're getting some of this data in, we're starting to get a picture of, maybe we need to rethink. Maybe we need to think differently. If we want to increase the numbers that haven't increased over many, many years, maybe we just need to take a different approach. And there's maybe some disconnect in some ways of what we're doing in terms of outreach and what's drawing women into aviation. So that's the kind of areas that I like to explore and look at. And hopefully we'll get some recommendations from the board that will help address some of those issues.
We definitely want to move the needle. Let's expound on that a little bit. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about how we can create and increase awareness among girls and underrepresented minorities about career paths in the industry. So how do we create and increase that awareness? Dana, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I can speak to what Lift Academy is doing. We're trying to meet the student where they're at. So we kind of thought outside of the box and created a Lift Lab, which is a for simulator, virtual reality simulation truck. And we take it out to certain events and really try to give that student that experience. I know that was what, brought me to aviation, was having that one experience. So bringing that, flight to the student, going to schools, and then also partnering with organizations like Girl Scouts of Indiana, Junior Achievement. And so all these organizations allow us to get in front of these students and really try to, inform them what aviation's like and give them an experience of flight.
Mm-hmm. Kate, can you expound on that a little bit? What do you see from, from your segment of the industry in terms of increasing that awareness?
Well, I think for one, what is happening with urban air mobility or advanced aerial mobility, gosh, they're always such a mouthful, is that it's exciting, right? You have this new industry, it's very enticing. If all goes well and we deliver on our promises, then that means a lot more aircraft flying and a lot more pilots. And we hope that the promise of this new industry and the excitement that accompanies it will hopefully bring in more pilots and bring in more interest. And I feel like we see that a lot whenever you kind of change up any industry and you bring in some new and exciting concepts, that there is renewed interest. And so selfishly, obviously, we hope that we do that for the industry across the board. I think looking at what it means to get young girls and women interested, I think, at least for me, I feel like there has to be a little bit of a dialogue shift. I think so often we target women and we say, you have to be good at STEM and you have to be, brave and strong and a risk taker. And we kind of put all these qualities on them, but I don't think we're doing that to little boys. And I don't think we're saying, men, you have to be really good at this and you have to be bold and aggressive. And I think we kind of put unfair expectations on young girls and women. And I'm someone who was never good at STEM, or at least at math. That was not my strong suit by a long shot, but I still ended up here in aviation, and I'm happy I did. And so I think it's important that when we communicate with these groups and the youth, is that it's an attainable industry for anyone. You don't have to be the bravest, most type A person in your class. You can be a pilot. And we just want, smart, capable people. And so I'd love to see that dialogue shift in how we talk to young folks.
It's a great point. You're all being very humble. You're all very successful in your careers. And so it's a good point. Let me change the question slightly and ask how the industry can provide more opportunities for girls and underrepresented minorities. Becky, what are your thoughts about that? And does higher ed have a role to play in that?
I think we all have a role to play to answer that question. And I think that the data show it. I'm gonna give you more statistics, of course, but the Women in Aviation survey that was done last year showed that 54% of the women in aviation said that they pursued aviation because they were introduced to aviation as a kid. So outreach is important. I think it's everybody's responsibility. So I would answer D, all of the above, to your question. But I think that we're seeing some really good examples of outreach programs and industry partnerships with them. Some previous research identified some best practice outreach programs like Girls in Aviation Day that just had a successful virtual experience where they tripled the amount of countries that they reached in their programming. They had girls from 55 countries participate. OBAP is launching. I'm really excited about this. OBAP is launching at the end of this month their Girls Launch program virtually. So they are targeting young women for aviation careers. AOPA's high school curriculum is another good example. And then finally, one of my favorites is the EAA Young Eagles program, which I've been an active volunteer in. And they're a great example of what I call sustaining the momentum. So they get kids excited through flight, but it's really important that we sustain the momentum in outreach and we give them steps to follow afterwards. And Young Eagles does that through a ground school experience, a first lesson experience. And to your point about industry, they've also recently partnered with United's Aviate program. So United Airlines has now partnered with and sponsored the EAA Young Eagles. So now we've got a good example of both industry, nonprofit outreach programs that is helping address the issue that we know is important, which is outreach to youth.
I loved reading about that partnership, and certainly the EAA Young Eagles program has been successful for many, many years, bringing people into aviation, including women. So exciting. Crystal, your company is a final destination for people seeking a career at a major air carrier. So to some extent, the awareness part when they come to you is already done. They're aware of you when they arrive. But what role do you think airlines should play in increasing awareness of these career opportunities for women?
I think they play a tremendous role because they have the pilots. they have the cool guys in the uniforms, you know, and the cool gals in the uniforms. And one of the things that we always get requests for, we get hundreds of requests for every year, is for a pilot to come to a school and talk to students. And I'm sure every airline gets those same requests. And up to when we started Propel, we really didn't have a consistent or streamlined message, or even have the pilot show up in their uniform. But we've gotten much more intentional about those types of things. I think the community outreach aspect of Propel and all the community outreach, it's really grassroots in a way. So each person get in front of one person and inspire one person, and then maybe mentor that person. And that's kind of what we were trying to do with our community Propel pillar. And so we created streamline and age appropriate, we call them visit kits, but basically if you're a pilot and you're going to speak at your son or daughter's school, we give you the tools to go and, you know, talk about Delta, talk about what it takes to be a pilot. You know, since we've looked at the data, we've kind of tweaked the messaging that we were sending students, because you don't have to be a STEM person. You know, you just have to be smart and capable, just like Kate said. And so we're working with that messaging, but getting a pilot in front of students, it really has a tremendous impact. And, you know, making sure that if you are going to a primarily African-American school, that you send an African-American pilot. If you're speaking in front of female, you know, young ladies, that you send a female pilot in uniform to speak to students. I think airlines have tremendous ability to impact the pipeline in terms of diversity. It's just getting those pilots in front of the students and then giving them the message to inspire them.
Great, I couldn't agree more. And Delta's been doing, has really been leading in that effort. So well done to you and your team. In the College of Aviation here, we're focused pretty hard on diversity. A couple of years ago, I asked one of our faculty members, Professor Michelle Halloran, to lead our efforts, and we've been doing pretty well with her help. This fall, the college has an all-time high of 18% female students. So that doesn't sound like a lot, but that's progress for us. And incidentally, Becky mentioned in maintenance, we have, for the first time, we have gone over 10% female enrollment in our aviation maintenance program. But if someone, let's say a contrarian, asks you the question, why is it important that we have a diverse workforce? How would you respond to that? In other words, why should we be worrying about this at all? So it may seem obvious to us, maybe not obvious to others. So Kate, how would you address the contrarian about that question?
Yeah, well, I think study after study after study has shown that diverse workforces are successful workforces. And I think, again, bringing women into the fold, whether it's flying, maintenance, any part of the industry, an engineer, a dispatcher, there's no doubt that women in the workforce improve it. And so I think if you're a numbers person, the numbers show that it's worthwhile. And I think all in all, it's hard to refute, but yeah, I know that there are some of those contrarians out there, unfortunately.
There really are. Dana, do you have any additional thoughts? How would you address that?
Well, first of all, congratulations on those numbers. That's really impressive.
Thank you.
Something we're definitely trying to achieve at Lift Academy. But I think, you know, having a gender balanced workforce addresses questions, concerns, and makes the environment a little bit more better. I mean, whenever we have, you know, female flight crews or, you know, half females, half males, I think, you know, there's a different thought process that goes into that working environment. So, you know, creating a gender balanced environment, I think there's just more decisions that are made that, you know, help everybody.
Excellent.
I would like to answer that one too.
Please.
If that's okay.
Please.
Not to derail the program, but I love that question because especially during COVID, because we have got to, especially as large organizations like Delta and United and other, all of the major airlines, Republic, we have to have all different thoughts at the table because we have to stay innovative right now. Things are changing rapidly every day. And if we have, every single person sitting at the decision-making table, it looks and thinks the same, then we're not going to be the airline of the future that we need to be. And so especially right now, it's important that we have diverse workforces, diverse leadership teams. It's incredibly important right now because you need all of those different thought processes so that we think like our customer, we think like our other employees, and we become the airline of the future that we hope we can be. So it just like, Kate said, study after study proves it. And right now, more than ever, it's important that we have diverse workforces.
Excellent, thank you. Becky, I'll ask you the same, but also, are you aware of any research on how companies can actually quantify the benefits of gender diversity in the workplace?
Well, to Kate's point, there have been several studies done that show, that diversity enhances the bottom line of organizations. So, as she summarized well, but there's also studies and there's also information to show, I think, as we know, that to all of the points raised by my colleagues here, your workforce should represent your customer base, and they should look like your customer base. So, really, let's cut to the chase. Last time you got on an airplane and looked at all the people in the cabin, I bet it wasn't 95% white male. So really, the workforce should be as diverse as your customer base is as well. And that will help bring that diversity of perspective that we were talking about in the group. So, yeah.
Excellent. That's a great way to look at it. A question for any of you. What is the most significant barrier you've encountered in your career?
I didn't have a maternity uniform that fit me.
Fair enough.
That was tough, and now we have one because I spoke up about that. So it's probably not the biggest barrier, but it was definitely a barrier, and I didn't understand why on earth didn't I have a pilot shirt that fit. And that's because not very many pilots have been pregnant, apparently. So we fixed that. But things like that, I call them hidden barriers, things that you don't really think of before you get into this field. What happens if your kid is sick, or what happens if, if you're breastfeeding and you have to store your milk, just things like that don't really apply to our male counterparts, and they've never been addressed. So we're doing that now. And if there are any young ladies watching, I want you to know that there are people working on those things right now. We're on it. So
Excellent.
I'm going to answer that from the research perspective, if I can. So I'm going to tell you what the data show are the big deterrents and the big barriers. So based on the research study, in particular, the Women in Aviation survey from last year, I asked a question about what are the deterrents, both to the recruitment and the retention of women in aviation. What are the biggest barriers? And I asked this question in a lot of different ways on the survey. And no matter how you ask the question, it's the same big three. And that is cost, the workplace culture, specifically bias, and the family life work balance. So those are the three big deterrents for both recruitment and retention for women in aviation. And those are the three that we really need to tackle if we really want to move those numbers.
I think touching on the culture piece, it's not certainly just one big barrier, but I have found, especially earlier in my career in flight training, that it was really frustrating to feel like you didn't belong. And it was really frustrating to feel like you had to change who you were to get through the program, or to get through the day, or to be successful. And I think, obviously we're getting better and we have initiatives to address that, but it's so frustrating when you're young and excited about aviation and you kind of get told from day one that maybe this isn't for you, and you don't know why. And there's no reason why someone's telling you that. It's just based on who you are as a person. And so I think, you know, again, it's not one big instance, but there have always been times along the way where that culture piece is a little jarring, and I sincerely something that I hope that we can address with this group.
So people in this industry, I've been in the industry a long time, have been talking about and working on diversity and diversifying its workforce, mostly in spurts, for quite a long time. And over that period of time, I think we've had some opportunity to evaluate what works and what does not work. You'll probably all have opinions on this, but Becky, let's again turn to the research. What do you see as working, and what have we done in the past that's really not working that we should just move away from?
So in terms of what's working, I think I gave some examples earlier of kind of some best practices on youth outreach. And I think that's really important to keep the throttles up on youth outreach, even in a bit of a downturn. And what's not working, I'm going to come back to the point that Kate made about how we're doing outreach. And there might be a little bit of a disconnect in terms of how we've done outreach and what's drawing women into aviation. So what the data support is that what draws women into aviation are factors such as that it's a fun profession, the adventure, the sense of adventure, the passion for aviation, the desire to prove your own abilities and to have a challenging opportunity. So it's the excitement, the fun, the passion that draws women in. We know that from the research. Mm-hmm. But outreach, a lot of times we tend to do, as Kate mentioned, through the lens of STEM. So it's not like when I was whatever age, I said, man, I really love math, I'm going to be a pilot. I really thought it was going to be fun and exciting and cool to fly an airplane, so that's what I did. So I think we need to rethink a little bit how we do outreach. We don't want to filter out because we're doing outreach through a STEM lens or through a STEM vantage point. We don't want to then filter out a group that may think that because I'm not interested in STEM, aviation isn't interested in me, to quote Heather Penny from EAA Women's Soar. So I think, I don't think we should turn away from STEM as an avenue, but I really think that, again, that's an example of if we're going to move the numbers and we're going to start to think differently, this might be one of those examples of how to do that.
Mm-hmm. So outreach is important, but how we do outreach is the critical thing that needs to really be thought through. Crystal, do you have any additional thoughts about that?
Maybe not what's not working, but something that's going to have to be addressed is the relationship between, at least in terms of getting women to become airline pilots, is the relationship between the labor unions and management. Everything at an airline has to be negotiated. And when only 4% of your constituency are female, the issues that are important to them don't get addressed at the negotiating table. At least they haven't historically. And, several times throughout my career, I've been told that's just not ever going to, it's not that we don't think your issue is important, it's just not going to happen because we have to talk about hourly pay and things like that are important to, the other 95. I mean, that's important to me as a female too. But, things like maternity leave are not important to 95% of our pilots. And so that's something that's going to have to be addressed. And I've been talking with ALPA for many years now about, and we've actually created a committee around family matters, different things of family matters and different issues that are particular to females, so that voice is heard, where historically it had not been. So that's something we're definitely going to have to address is what do we do if we continue to treat small numbers or small percentages like small percentages, then that will perpetuate itself. So we're going to have to also get ALPA or other union, labor unions on board with the importance of these issues if we want to move that needle at the airlines.
Very good point. We've talked a lot about attracting women into the industry. Let's talk a little bit more about retaining them once we've recruited them. We've touched on that. What are the challenges that the aviation aerospace industries need to address in order to retain underrepresented minorities and women in these fields? Dana, once the students exit from the Lift Academy and enter a career at Republic, how do we ensure they stay in their careers?
That's a great question. And touching on what the group has said, retention comes into how we're supporting those females. I went through 2 pregnancies as an airline pilot, so I definitely had challenges that I think are getting better. So making sure that we're addressing maternity leave or actually time off prior to delivery. Countries like India have 14% female airline pilots. So what are they doing? What can we look at with their airlines, and how are they recruiting women, but most importantly, retaining them through all of their life challenges?
Kate, once we recruit them, how do we retain them?
Well, Crystal's example was really good about, when only 5% of the population has specific needs, they don't get addressed. And I think across the board between manufacturers and airlines and operators, we have outdated policies that were written for 1950s nuclear families and don't necessarily take into account what it takes to be a mother and working, and having both family members working. So I think that's a big part of it. We don't necessarily have policies that are always friendly across the board. I think flat out, we still have issues with discrimination, and we still have toxic workplaces and areas that make it very clear that women are not part of the team there. And we see those examples time and time again, whether it's through, reporting our social media or just stories between women who work in the field. And that's, it's disappointing that it's 2020 and that atmosphere still exists. So I think we very much have to address that. I think we know that we have issues. We know that we can solve them. We just have to kind of be honest sometimes about the issues that we have within the industry. And then I think, again, to Crystal's point about the 5%, where there's just often kind of a dismissal of these challenges that women face because they are in the minority. And so all in all, I think there are certainly things that we can do that would really help with retention. And it's about making the workplace a welcoming environment for all people.
Excellent. Is retention, I assume that's part of your mission on the board? Excellent. I hope that gets a lot of attention. You've all had extremely successful careers in an obviously overwhelmingly male-dominated field. We have a lot of young women on in the audience. What words of advice do you have for women looking to be where you are? Crystal, let me start with you.
I am passionate about this work that we're doing, and it is important work that we're doing because we really do have a unique opportunity to make those policies that Kate's talking about so much more inclusive. And those numbers that Becky's talking about, we have some data now that we can actually start to create our training or create our outreach around these things. So we are, all that stuff is happening right now, but the flying the airplane part, that's the good stuff. That's the good part. I love that part. I have had an amazing career in terms of flying and seeing the world. And if you're looking for something that's fun and adventurous and challenging, it is all of those things. And it's got something, this industry, whether it's pilot or mechanic or, air traffic control, whatever it is, there's something for you in this industry if that's what you're looking for. There's definitely work to be done in making it a more inclusive industry for women and recruiting women into it. And, we are doing that work, but it does have something for you if you are looking for a really challenging career. And it has been an amazing ride. And I would recommend it to anyone that was interested. I would say 100% dip your toe in if that's something that you're interested in.
Excellent. Becky, how about you? Advice for women looking to be where you are?
Well, first of all, exactly what Crystal just said. Be ready for what may come your way. You have no idea what, so many opportunities in aviation beyond what you're probably even looking at on the scope now. I'm a perfect example of that. I ended up someplace I did not even start out on my path, on my radar, and I love it. So there's a lot of different opportunities in aviation. So check them out. Take the risk. If it sounds fun, go for it and go do it. So that's one. But number two is really develop that community of support. Find your sisters who are going to have your back and who are going to be your community of support, because you will hit some things. It is known in the industry. You're going to hit some times in the industry, and you're going to want those women in your small group that are going to champion your cause. Maybe they are doing what you want to do as a career now, but they're going to be champions for you. They're going to lift you up when you fail, and you will. If you're doing it right and taking risks, you're going to fail on occasion. That's where you learn. So have that great community of support and find that tight group of sisters that are going to help you along the way.
That's great advice. Great advice. Finding the right community can be so important to job satisfaction, longevity, and career growth. What is it about the community at your current job that makes you stay? So Kate, you're in a field that is creating something that is all new. I've had the pleasure of visiting your company and talking with some of the employees. And by the way, thank you for that invitation. And I was struck by the enthusiasm they have for what they do. So what is life like at Joby that makes you stay?
Well, enthusiasm is pretty spot on. We have probably the most intelligent, enthusiastic, compassionate group of people I have ever worked with in my life. And it makes it fun. Absolutely. I feel like I have a family, and I always feel like that's cliche to say that you have a work family, but I do. And I trust these people, and I believe in these people, and we celebrate each other's successes, and we root for each other. And we are truly, despite being over 500 people, we are one team, and we are all in it together. And so that enthusiasm for what we're doing and what we're building is contagious, and I love it. And in a subgroup of that, we have a Women of Joby group that has also been an incredible network, talking about finding your sisters and finding your community. We really support each other and provide that kind of community for each other. So it's been an incredible team to work with, and every single person there is what makes Joby so special.
Excellent. Looks like a very fun, exciting place to work. It really does.
Sure.
And Dana, you've been at Republic now for quite a long time as an airline captain, assistant chief pilot, and now running the academy. What makes that organization so desirable for you?
Definitely the people. I've always had the pleasure of working with a great team. In my current position, though, it's definitely seeing the success of the students and celebrating with them. With every achievement they have, either soloing or getting, accomplishing a check ride, I feel like a proud mom after they accomplish that. So it's really great to be able to celebrate their achievements with them.
Excellent. These webinars go so quickly. Our time this evening has elapsed. I'm watching the clock here a little bit. Any final thoughts for many of you before we wrap it up? I want to be respectful of all your time.
I think one very quick thought for anyone who's new in the industry and is trying to figure out if this is the right fit. You do belong, even though there's some days where it might feel like you don't. You do, and just keep pushing, and you'll find it incredibly rewarding.
Well said. One add-on, since we're also here as Women in Aviation Advisory Board members, we're working hard for you. This is a big responsibility. We're all, I think I'd speak for all of us, that we're honored and humbled to be a part of that, and that we are welcome to other people's input. So there's actually an email address on the website for the board. So that people are listening to this and they're thinking, wow, I've got something I'd like to share with the board for some ideas. They can do that at that email address, and it will go to the board and we'll get it. And we love to get people's input. So we welcome that as well. So, and thank you for highlighting the issue at Embry-Riddle. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. You're most welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been an amazing conversation and a true highlight of our virtual homecoming week. We wish you all the best in your careers, your work on the FAA's Women in Aviation Advisory Board, and your advocacy in the outreach, recruitment, and retention of women in aviation. We hope to see you on campus at some point in the future. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next webinar will be on Tuesday, October 20th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, when we will welcome Embry-Riddle alumnus Peter Serta to Aviation Outlook. Peter is the Regional Vice President in the Americas for the International Air Transport Association, IATA, the trade association, whose close to 290 member airlines transport more than 82% of total air traffic in the world. Based in Miami, Mr. Serta leads the regional organization from North to South America, which advocates to make air transport safer, secure, reliable, and recognized as an indispensable network that generates 12.8 million jobs in the Americas region. With IATA, Peter has also served as Regional Director for Safety, Operations, and Infrastructure. Thanks once again to our remarkable Women's Alumni Network panel and to the people behind the scenes and those of you who join us from around the world that help make Aviation Outlook possible. For the deans of the Colleges of Aviation at Embry-Riddle and the Eagle Alumni Association, I'm Alan Stolzer. We hope to see you for our next webinar on October 20th. Thank you for joining us, and good night.